Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Deviants Tour. This is our New York City event, and we have some incredible co-sponsors who have made it happen, and I'm so excited to be having a conversation with McNally Jackson. Before I hand it over to our co-hosts, I would be remiss not to acknowledge the pain that our nation is feeling right now amidst the loss of Black lives at the hands of our nation's law enforcement. So to the Black folks who are watching, your lives matter. To my predominantly white fans, we must do better. I've posted a link in our Crowdcast description for those who are hoping to make a difference, to our friends who identify as QTPOC. And in the meantime, please join me in a moment of silence to honor the lives of Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others. Thank you. I'm now excited to introduce our bookstore co-host, John Francisconi. People have trouble with my last name as Italian. I should be better with it. How do you say it?
Francesconi.
Oh, so that's it. I get in trouble with Italians because they tell me my last name should be Cervini.
Cervini.
But that's not
Cervini.
And I tell them they got to take it up. Yeah. I tell them they got to take it up with my grandmother because. But anyways, thank you so much for having us.
Of course, thank you. So my name is John Francisconi, and I manage the new McNally Jackson, which opened in City Point in downtown Brooklyn at the beginning of March. And for the time being, I'll be bringing you virtual events like tonight's. If you go to McNallyJackson.com and look at our events calendar, you'll see that we're hosting some really incredible writers in the coming days and weeks. And I'm adding more virtual events every day, as far ahead as July and August and September. So please keep an eye on the site, subscribe to our newsletter to hear more about what and who's coming soon. We're glad that we can still host these events this way, and we hope that they're recuperative for you as they've been recuperative for us during this difficult and confusing time. Almost all of our events are free, but we do have copies of Eric's brand new book, The Deviant's War, for sale on our website. You can actually click that pretty little buy button to get your copy today. I've been very moved by the amount of support we've seen from our customers ever since we closed the physical stores. So thank you to everyone who's placed an order with us already. As we switch gears from the slow-moving crisis of staying at home to the differently slow-moving and somehow infinitely more difficult crisis of navigating when and how we will safely reopen, indie bookstores like ours need still more support. And so if you enjoy events like tonight's and want us to keep hosting more of them, and you're able to order a copy of Eric's book from us, we'd be greatly appreciative. We're thrilled to have Eric in conversation tonight with McNally Jackson. Richie is the author of Gay Like Me, recently published by HarperCollins. He is also an award-winning Broadway, television, and film producer. As an alumnus of New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, he endowed a fellowship program, the Richie Jackson Artist Fellowship, at his alma mater in 2015 to assist graduates in the transition from academia to a lifelong career in the arts. He and his husband live in New York City with their 2 sons. And our guest of honor tonight is Dr. Eric Cervini, or Eric Cervini, and he is an award-winning historian in LGBTQ plus politics, historian of LGBTQ plus politics and culture. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard College and received his PhD in history from the University of Cambridge, where he was a Gates Scholar. About his new book, the wonderful Thomas Mallon said, "When Frank Kameny was dismissed from his job in 1957, the Army lost an astronomer and the cause of freedom gained a general. For the next 50 years, having found his real life's work, Kameny stood on every front line of the gay rights movement. Because of him, more than anyone else, hundreds of thousands of federal employees, including soldiers, now go off each morning without fear to earn their livings and serve their country. The Deviants' War thrillingly gives Kameny his due, putting this brave, sometimes impossible, iron-willed man at the center of an epic struggle for liberty. And on that note, I will pass things back to you.
Thank you so much. And you know what, I realized, I think it was my job to also introduce our nonprofit co-host this evening, which is the New York City Historic LGBT Sites Project. So just a little bit about them. The Historic Sites Project is a pioneering cultural heritage initiative and educational resource that is comprehensively identifying sites connected to LGBT history and culture in New York City. It was launched in 2015, and they are making invisible history visible by identifying extant locations and establishing a visceral link to a largely unknown narrative. Beyond the already recognized Stonewall, the project is identifying hundreds of existing sites dating back from the 17th century through 2000 that illustrate the richness of the city's LGBT history and the community's contributions to American culture. There are nearly 300 sites, including Frank Kameny's house, and the project's work includes nominating LGBT sites to the National Register of Historic Places. So please visit their website, nyclgbtsites.org. There is a link at the bottom of the page. If you just click the little I next to the New York City title at the top, that'll bring it up. And you can learn more and explore NYC's place-based LGBT history. But anyways, a little bit of a mouthful, but Rishi, thank you so much again for joining us. And John, do you mind if I minimize you?
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you
congratulations.
So thank you.
Thank you.
There we go. All right. How's this angle?
Every time you change it, I have to adjust.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And I think we talked a little bit before this about how, given the current moment in history that we're experiencing, that we want to make this a conversation about allyship and how our community, given our experiences and what we have borrowed from the Black Freedom Movement, how we can do our jobs now and join the fight. But anyways, for people who may not know you, can you tell me just a little bit about your life and your story? Because I think so many people should read your words, and especially the prologue where you declare being gay and being political have always been inextricably linked for me. So what's your story and how'd you get there?
You know, I'm reading your incredible book, and you know, the gay is good that Frank came up with in such a beautiful way. For me, gay has always felt better. I have always felt lucky to be gay. I always thought it was a blessing. And when I got to New York as a 17-year-old college student, my first act as a gay man was a protest to demand funding for AIDS.
Wow.
I came to New York City in 1983, right at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. This moment for my friends and I back then, coming out didn't feel like an exploration of identity or a long sort of opening to our identity. It felt political. We had to stand up to be counted, to show the government just how many of us there were. So I've always felt being gay and being political were intrinsically linked. Being gay itself is an act of, activism. Holding the person you love's hand on the street is activism. So every moment of my life feels very political constantly. Being a parent, having 2 children, being married, being out, being an activist, making sure that our community that was gay when I moved to New York, and now it's LGBTQ, making sure we all understand what that means. That rainbow flag that we insist on using and is blindingly positive is not just stripes on a flag so all of us feel represented. It is a chain link to each other. We rise and fall together. And we have to know that every fight within our community is all of our fight.
I love that last bit about every single fight within our community because is all of our fight, because as a historian, what you see time and time again is those with the least to lose are the first to join the fight and then the first to become forgotten. And I think right now, as we're trying to figure out how to celebrate Pride without parades because of the pandemic, and in the middle of this national reckoning that we're experiencing on the racial front, recognizing that we have forgotten people, especially Black trans women. I just received word that on Monday there was a terrible beating of a Black trans woman in Minnesota, and I don't think people are saying these names enough.
Right. There is an epidemic of trans women of color being murdered in this country. I think there were 18 already this year. That's our fight. As much as a trans woman of color's fight, it's my fight too. And what I have been concerned about the last couple of days is making sure that Black trans lives matter, that Black queer lives matter, because these are the most vulnerable among us. And like you said, they are the first ones to be attacked. And we have to stand up with them. And we also have to understand that our adversaries pick off the most vulnerable and then go down the line. It's not like, we are going to ban trans people from the military. We are going to criminalize doctors for giving life-affirming and life-saving medical care to trans youth. But we're okay with gay men. That's not how that works. They start at the most vulnerable, and they're coming for all of us.
And not only does the government come for the most vulnerable first, but at the end of the day, what that proves, what you just said it proves, is that they still see us, even though we're white, cis, gay men. At the end of the day, we're just as appalling to them.
Right.
And that at the end of the day, they're going to see anyone who isn't, this white male.
This straight white male.
And it's, I think, one of the sad part of history is that there's this optimism that runs throughout all of activism that I think is really unfortunate. This feeling that if only we could get our foot in the door for the people at the top in our movement, the most privileged, then it'll trickle down human rights.
Right.
And time again, it doesn't work. And I'm wondering, you said you got started in AIDS activism.
Well, one of the things I noticed about your book that I thought was so interesting is the same conversations that were going on in the 50s and 60s in the gay movement were happening back in the 80s. Not necessarily the AIDS movement, but I remember being in many conversations the morning after the Gay Pride March, where people were complaining, why are they putting the dykes on bikes on the cover of the New York Times? Why are the drag queens always the ones who are on the news? Why don't they show normal gay people? It was the same conversation that was happening in your book. That has not changed. We had this insane conversation about Pete Buttigieg when he ran and whether he was gay enough. This is the same thing going on throughout our movement's history, is this litmus test we give everybody. as to whether or not they're the right kind of gay to do our message. And what I found so striking in your book is what Bob Martin said. May I read it, this part?
Sure.
So you could probably recite the year he said it. But he said, we see the persecution of homosexual. Let me show the beautiful book. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
We see the persecution of homosexuality as part of a general attempt to oppress all minorities and keep them powerless. Our fate is linked with these minorities. If the detention camps are filled tomorrow with blacks, hippies, and other radicals, we will not escape that fate. All our attempts to disassociate ourselves from them notwithstanding. Nothing has changed.
And he got in a lot of trouble for that statement, for that. Oh yeah, because he was supposed to be operating under the auspices of the youth committee of NACO, which was the North American Conference of Homophile Organizations. So Nacho spelled out but pronounced NACO. And he did not have authorization to write that. And so Frank actually got very mad at him for that and for attending some of these anti-war marches where he was marching also in solidarity of organizations later on, like the Black Panthers. And as the book chronicles, right after Stonewall, you have the Gay Liberation Front, which comes to be, it's supposed to be, this is the movement for everyone. And the reason it fractures is because some activists wanted to donate $500 to Bobby Seale and the Black Panthers. And the other activists said, no, our causes should not be intertwined. And we should only be focusing on gay rights. And that's how the Gay Activist Alliance came to be. And so I'm not here to judge the creators of the Gay Activist Alliance, but it's a fact that we do have to acknowledge that we had this opportunity back then that was missed. And now history is giving us the opportunity to make it right.
We need to learn from our mistakes. We excluded women at the beginning, and people of color, and trans people, and I forgot what your book called them. The word that everybody was using for anybody that wasn't what their idea of a proper gay person. But we still have that impulse, and we have to fight against it. Tell everyone what Mattachine put on the window or the wall at Stonewall after the riots.
Oh, I gotta find. That's a great. I forgot about that part in the book. Is after, I'll have to pull up the exact language, but right after the first night of the riots, the Mattachine Society of Washington, which was the primary pre-Stonewall gay rights organization or homophile organization in New York City. And after the first night of pickets, let me see if I can find it.
They basically said, behave.
Yeah, it's so, if you can find the photo.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
No, I want to find the exact thing. Regardless, yeah, it was like, please remain calm. Please stop hitting
to our neighborhood.
Exactly. Yeah. And so obviously people did not really follow those guidelines.
I'm so struck by, you were saying about all the Black Lives Matter and all the social media storm that was happening yesterday. But I keep wondering that, are we making sure that all those companies that put, a black square on their social media and said they're listening and Black Lives Matter, are we looking at their political giving and seeing whether they're supporting Republicans who are blocking the Equality Act? Are they supporting local legislators in states where they have business that are passing these bathroom bills and trying to pass these bills legislating doctors' medical care of trans youth. We have to look at these corporations beyond just their social media hashtag and make sure that they're including support for Black trans people and Black queer people.
Amen. And I just posted something on Facebook calling for pride organizations to follow in the footsteps of Los Angeles, which is, they just announced it today, and I'm actually really, really proud of them. Their pride organization is organizing a solidarity march explicitly to support Black Lives Matter. And as you read, and as you experienced in the 80s, pride is synonymous with resistance. And now is the time, I think, to really reevaluate what the celebrations have become.
Yeah, I think pride's been in for a reckoning, and they've become parades, not marches. When I was first going to them, the pink triangle was the symbol of our resistance and our protest. Now it's these, as I said, blindingly positive rainbows. It's very easy for corporations and politicians to slap a rainbow on something. We have to get back to our marches. We have to get back to fighting there is a riptide of hate that is coming for us now. There are over 100 anti-LGBTQ bills in state legislatures right now.
Wow.
And we are waiting for the Supreme Court to hand down 2 decisions in cases of whether or not sex discrimination includes sexual orientation and gender identity. Now is not the time for a parade. And like I said, there's an epidemic of trans women of color being murdered.
Yeah, and I think I was looking around at other cities' pride celebrate. What are they doing now? And trying to figure out if it was just LA that was doing this. And it looks like New York City is doing some sort of webinar for it, but it's not even in their description. It doesn't say anything about it being explicitly for Black Lives Matter or Black Trans Lives Matter. And it still has T-Mobile, right? It's like, we're having this webinar to talk, sponsored by T-Mobile. And that in order for them to put that out, they had to call their representative at T-Mobile to, make sure, hey, is it okay that we continue to do this, or they risk X, right? And so we
got to get these look, when I was 17 marching in my first Pride March, we would have loved corporate support to just see us. And I think these corporations that support their LGBTQ employees are amazing, and hopefully they're supporting them in their health benefits and supporting them in their parental leave when one of them has a baby. All of these things should be very real. But when you go to this parade, you see it feels much more like a commercial and much more like sort of a corporate bonding than it is an active support of LGBTQ people. And as I write in my book, I say, if the pink triangle were still our symbol, would companies be slapping them on their socks and their water bottles and on their windows? We take a pink washing and say, thanks for the bath.
Yeah. And for people listening, 2 calls to action. 1, I forgot to mention, please ask us questions. We want to open this up and really make it a dialogue open to all. So there's a button right below if you're in the Crowdcast that says ask a question. You can type it in. It won't interrupt us or anything. And later we'll be able to go through them. And also, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can put your questions there, and we'll make sure to see them. Second, if you do want if you agree with us and you do want to demand that we return Pride to its roots and show our solidarity for Black Lives Matter and Black Trans Lives Matter, I posted on my page a spreadsheet with all the major cities in America with the Pride organizations and their contact information. So you can email them and demand that they have a solidarity march this month and that they make it permanent, because this is our chance.
I would also just, since this is a New York event, people should check out Reclaim Pride.
Yes.
Which are trying to bring Pride back to being a march with less corporations, less police presence. And last year they had a march that started in the morning on Pride Day. It started at Stonewall, marched uptown, the old route that the first Gay Liberation March took. And it was very much like what it felt like when I was in the marches in the 80s. Much more fist waving than flag waving. And people were really protesting the conditions to which we are all living under. And I think we should all support, in New York, support Reclaim Pride.
And they actually made it in the book at the very end, because the book ends in 1971 with Frank's campaign, but the epilogue, kind of wraps up all the characters and what they've been up to. And one of my favorite characters, who I actually was on the phone with yesterday, is Randy Wicker, he lives in Hoboken. For people who may not know him, he organized the very first homophile pre-Stonewall gay rights march in New York City in 1964, 5 years before Stonewall. And he's the first to admit that one of his goals back in the 60s was to prove how respectable and just like regular straight white Americans, homosexuals were, by de-emphasizing the role and the visibility of trans people of color, especially within our movement. So what has he done? He's made it his life mission. He's 81 years old, mostly in a wheelchair, makes it his life mission to fight in the names of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. And he participated, along with 45,000 other people, in that Reclaim Pride Coalition Queer Liberation March. And I think he's
incredible. My husband, Jordan, and I, the last chapter of my book is about that day and about Stonewall 50. And my husband, Jordan, and I took our 3-year-old to the march. We marched past my first New York City apartment on 10th Street.
Oh, wow.
Where I lived there with my college roommate who died of AIDS. And we marched with Voices For, which is an organization giving voices to LGBTQ people around the world. And it was an extraordinary moment. 45,000 people came to that Reclaim Pride March.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect template. And it goes to show, especially Randy's story, goes to show that it's okay. I've marched in plenty of pride parades, right? I had so much fun waving the rainbow flag, but it's okay to change and say, you know what, after studying our history and realizing how much of pride is borrowed from the Black freedom movement, this is our time to give it back.
Right. And I think also one of the things that I think we should think about, when I was younger, the marches always were a bellwether about what was going on for us at that moment. They're not now. You go to these parades, you can't tell that there's an epidemic of trans women of color being murdered. You can't tell there is a riptide of hate coming from the government towards us. That's wrong. We need our marches to reflect what is going on today, now, for us. And, I really would recommend that people think about now how often do they spend time in the community, in our diverse community, besides just Pride Day? And how much of our history do they know? Your book is not just history because it's homework, we should know it. it will empower people to know the incredible people who came before us, who got us this far. Knowing Sylvia Rivera, knowing Marsha Johnson, knowing Frank, this will help all of us gain our own gay self-esteem.
Mm-hmm. And will you tell everyone about kind of the impetus behind your own book and what compelled you to write it? Because it is a letter, right, to your son. So why do you think this transfer of knowledge is so important?
Well, so my husband and I have 2 children, and when our older son was 15, he told us he was gay, and I was elated. I wanted him to be gay. I had hoped to be gay. My greatest wish was for him to be gay. And then he said, Daddy, being gay is not a big deal. My generation doesn't think it's a big deal. I thought, oh no, being gay is a really big deal. It's the best thing about me. It's the most important thing about me. And I was worried that if he diminished it and demeaned it by saying gay is just a part of me, I just happen to be gay, he wouldn't take full advantage of the gift that it is. So I started to think about all the things I needed to tell him about what it means to be a gay man. And then Donald Trump was elected. And then I had to warn him about what it takes to be a gay man in America. So I sat down and I wrote him a letter, and it's called Gay Like Me. And that was the impetus for the book.
And I'm wondering now, as we assimilate more, right? Because the age, I think the average age of coming out has decreased from like 17 when I was in high school, and 15 years later, it's now something like 13 or something like that.
15.
Yeah. So, do you think that is an universally good thing, that people are feeling more comfortable, or do you think we're losing something because there isn't this kind of rite of passage that people are?
Well, one of the things I worry about is our LGBTQ kids are erased in their classrooms. They're not learning their history. Your book is going to be a great service to them because they're not taught about themselves. And less than 7% of LGBTQ kids get an inclusive sex education. So they're coming out, but they're not being prepared for what it is to be a queer person and what it takes to be a queer person in America. And I think a lot about what it means to be a gay elder now that I'm 54 years old and have lived through 36 years of history as a gay person. And I think it's a lot like parenting. Parents have a covenant with every other adult. When your child leaves your home, you expect other adults to take care of them, either to look after them in the playground or at play dates or in school. With our queer kids, that covenant is broken. It's either broken by their own parents, it's broken by our government, by our religious institutions, it's broken by our education system. So our job as queer elders is to take in our LGBTQ youth, surround them with community, raise them up so they can find their potential and unleash their gifts. We restore the covenant. That is our moral imperative. And these young kids who are coming out so early desperately need us to be there for them.
And another angle that you provide for us in your book and in your life and experiences is the world of entertainment and the arts. And I'm curious, for people who may be watching in the entertainment industry, I'm in LA, I know you're in New York, and of course our worlds definitely overlap, and they're wondering now in this moment, in this middle of this conversation about reframing and returning pride, what is, in your opinion, the obligation of the arts world in participating in this?
Well, the one thing I would say is the same thing Harvey Milk said, is everybody has to come out. Come out, come out, come out. When you can, where you can, as long as you're safe. And I really, think it's a moral imperative also that people find their destiny and try to reach their potential. People in the arts have to tell our stories. It is not a negative to be called an LGBTQ writer, an LGBTQ filmmaker, an LGBTQ actor. That is a prize moniker. And I think we should embrace it, and we should make sure we're telling our stories, telling all of our stories. And when we're in these rooms that are deciding on what shows are being picked up, who's going to be in the writer's room, what directors we're hiring, we have to widen the group that we are hiring from. It has to include every member of our community, and they have to tell their stories in their voice.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great Langston Hughes poem called Notes on Commercial Theater, which basically talks about how producers come and steal the blues away. And he says, if someone's going to tell our story, I guess it's going to have to be me. I guess it's going to have to be me. And that's what the arts and queer people in the arts have to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think especially like you said, the people in the room who make the decisions kind of behind the scenes also need to recognize their moral obligation, because I'm very lucky that my publisher took a risk on publishing this story, because historically, in their mind, gay history doesn't sell. And you hear that kind of same rationale in Hollywood as well, about whether it's gay actors or gay stories. And what I always try to tell people is that, well, that mentality is self-fulfilling. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, if we're hiring the same decision makers, we'll get the same decisions. So if every decision maker is a cis white man, a cis white straight man, you'll get the same decisions. Even if you have white gay men, you'll get the same decisions.
Mm-hmm.
We need the decision makers to change too.
Mm-hmm. Right. And if you put the same resources behind anyone who's talented or any story that is compelling, then people will find out and appreciate it. Because I think if there's anything that, what's that?
Look at the show Pose.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's beautifully done. One of our events later this week is with Johnny Sibley, who I can't wait to talk about kind of the intersection of ballroom culture and the current moment in our conversation now. So that's such a good point. I am told that we have a few questions. So would you mind if I bring Vivian on?
No, but it's going to change my framing. I might.
Oh no. Thankfully, I'm glad, because it'll make things shorter, so you can't see as much, which is always a good thing for me. Okay, let's see. Toggle video. Oh, but can we? Oh no. Okay.
There, I think I could unmute myself.
Oh, okay.
Hey.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi.
So I hear we have some questions.
We do. There's a great question here in the crowdcast, and if folks have more, you should definitely put them in there. This person asked, why do you think queer rights are in decline at the moment? Loaded question.
You want me to take that?
Go for it. I'll add it if there's anything else.
So, what I think happened is in 2015, the marriage equality decision by the Supreme Court came down, and the White House lit up in rainbow. We all thought it was beautiful, and our adversaries think that house belongs only to them. And so they had gay marriage and trans people being able to serve in the military, and a woman running for president, and a black man had just been president for 8 years, and a swift straight lash has come at us, and it is a riptide of hate. And I think it all started at that moment that was so beautiful for us, but they saw our liberation, or at least some of our liberation. They're trying to take it away, and they're going to try to make sure we don't get it back.
Mm-hmm. And I couldn't have said it better. And I think also recognizing that it's a political tool by those in power that is proven time and time again in history that when you are failing, either on the foreign or domestic level, on concerns that are normally the proper function of government, then you find a scapegoat and you find a distraction, whether this is the Inquisition hundreds of years ago in Europe, or the Red Scare, or the Lavender Scare, or the Republican Party's current war on trans children. It is a distraction to keep us from having the important conversations about income inequality in this country, about homelessness, and about the failures abroad.
Awesome. I have some questions for you, Richie. I know that you guys talked largely about the book and about the state of, our resistance in America, both queer folk as well as people of color. I wanted to hear some more about your artist experience, just because I think it's super interesting. So I was reading about your Richie Jackson Artist Fellowship, which I think is super cool. And for those who don't know, it supports students as they transition from academia into a lifelong career in the arts. What was your experience in this transition like? And what was the impetus for creating the fellowship?
Well, my when I graduated NYU School of the Arts, I didn't know anything about how to get it. It was a little like coming out. I didn't know how to be a gay person when I came out. And when I graduated college, I didn't know how to have a career in the arts. And what I wanted to do was create a situation where young people who were graduating the School of the Arts or had been 2 to 3 years out of Tisch, that's NYU School of the Arts. I wanted to create a situation where they would have one person who said, I support your aspirations, I believe in you. And even if the stipend I give everybody is not life-changing, they get a check to do whatever they want with. They can finish a film, they can get headshots, they could stop working at the ice cream store one night a week so they could relax or see friends. That's only part of it. The other part was 6 months of mentorship where I would meet with them simply to help answer any question, but also to validate their aspirations, to make them feel like somebody who's in the business cares about them and wants them to succeed. Because you can't consider yourself successful if you're not helping someone else get where you are. And I don't believe in closing the door behind me. The whole idea, the purpose for all of us is to help the people coming behind us.
I love that. And I love the work that you've been doing and the way that you talk about inclusivity for folks in the arts. And I hear a lot about representation as an Asian woman and how important it is for us to be represented, right? And how the same thing applies for folks from the LGBTQ community. So my question is, what barriers do LGBTQ folks still face in the arts industry? And what is sort of like a way forward for that?
Well, I think, it's not only in the arts, it's in books as well, since we're talking about books. 8 out of the 10 most challenged titles in libraries are LGBTQ subjects. And, there's still people who don't want actors who are out to have starring roles. We're not getting our stories told in the way we should tell them. Christine Vachon, who's a the best independent film producer, said her wish for the LGBTQ community in the arts is for us to be able to tell all of our stories so that we don't always have to come off as so great. She likes to show the flaws and the good and the bad. And I think I would like people who are LGBTQ to commit themselves for their art to telling our stories. We're not in a position to say, well, I want to do a Marvel movie, or I want a more universal story. Gay people seeing themselves on screen, seeing themselves on the television is life-saving. All of us who are in the arts should commit ourselves to saving lives by making sure the stories we're writing, the movies we're producing and directing, the roles we're taking as actors are our stories, because it saves lives. And to the community of audience and viewers, seek out our stories. Don't just get mainstream movies. If you watch movies that you're not a part of, that don't tell your story, you are further diminishing yourself and giving yourself further evidence that you're marginalized. We should be telling the stories, and the audience, our gay audience, should be trying to find it.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a little angry, and I think it's because I haven't spoken to anybody in 3.5 months. So I have a little bit of bunker mentality. I'm a little
understandable. We have a couple questions coming in, and this is a great one for both of you. This person, John, says, I'm a gay man in his late 20s, and I feel some of my friends don't appreciate our history or really know it at all. How do you get them interested in learning about it and knowing it's always a fight for our rights?
I know 2 books you could buy.
I love that question. I mean, I've made it my mission, and professionally and personally, to make queer history accessible and also interesting. And I think a big part of the problem, beyond the history itself being erased in our history books and in our curricula, is I think that tradition of respectability, this is going to be controversial, that tradition of respectability extends into academia and into the study of queer history, to the point where some of the harder truths and some of the humanity of the figures of activists in the past has been glossed over or forgotten. Meaning, if we humanize the stories that we're telling and we portray activists, whether it's Frank Kameny, Sylvia Rivera, or the people who were the bad guys, right, and seeing how prejudice functions, and showing that each of these individuals are fully formed, complex human beings who had sex, who did drugs, who were arrested, who said racist things, but also did really amazing things. And I think if you show the full spectrum of the human condition, I think that is our role now that we have the foundations academically in place, and the academy takes queer history seriously thanks to past historians. Now we need to say, okay, who are these as human beings? And that's what I try to do in my book. Is, yes, it's based off of a historical dissertation, but if you want all the hardcore analysis, you can go into the endnotes. 33% of the words are endnotes with a lot of historical analysis. But if you want the stories of these human beings, read the book. And there's a reason why the introduction opens up with a bathroom sex scene, because that is where Frank Kameny, that was the catalyst, him getting caught by 2 police officers hiding in a ceiling in a public restroom in San Francisco. That one indiscretion, even though he never liked to talk about it, and that moment is never really discussed in history books prior to now, that is what began his persecution and therefore his radicalization as an activist. And we need to have these conversations, as uncomfortable as they are, as uncomfortable as it is to accept that, you know, the grandfather of gay rights was radicalized in a public restroom.
I would say that you know, I don't get angry when young people don't know our history because they're not given it in school, and they have to seek it out for themselves. I always say seek it out because it will make you feel prouder and give you good gay self-esteem. Gay Like Me came about because I wanted to write the book I needed when I was growing up, and the book that our son needs. I've gotten so many incredible messages from people who've read it who said, I wish I had this when I was young. I'd feel so much better about myself. Or just learning our history, that, for instance, the blood ban. So many people don't know about gay men being prevented and blocked from giving blood. So, I think if you seek out our books and read about the people throughout history, I talk about them in my book, and Eric's Page Turner also talks about them. You'll feel not alone as a gay person. You'll feel part of a long continuum of extraordinary people who always change the world. And they are just like us, but they did extraordinary things. And what that will teach you is you can do extraordinary things too.
I love that. It's like not even just, solidarity in this day, but that we can find solidarity with our history too, and that can empower our movement. Similarly related question, but a really great question, specifically for Eric. Ken Lesbader said that Kameny was adamant about the need to present an appropriate image to the public as employable citizens, as you mentioned, and similar to what you were saying about Randy Wicker. Based on your research and your access to his archive and new materials, do you feel that in his lifetime, he gradually better understood the need for a more inclusive approach for liberation and rights?
It's a good question. And I think it is one of the central conflicts. I was talking the talk about, these fully formed complex humans. Frank Kameny is a hero, but he was a flawed hero. And I think we need to be careful to not just recognize his successes, but also his failures. And I think Ken touched on one of them, which is the strategy of respectability, even though I think it made it easier for them at the time in those very first marches in front of the White House and in Philadelphia to actually begin, because it gave them almost this facade of saying, oh, well, we're just federal employees trying to work for our government. Let us wave a flag. I think then, as the movement should have been expanding, he made a mistake in not opening up these marches and not realizing that, yes, optics are important, but even more important are numbers. And if you try to organize a march on the 4th of July and require men to wear wool suits, they're not going to show up. People like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson are not allowed, right? They literally are told there are restrictions saying you must be wearing XYZ things. You must be wearing a dress if you are female, etc. And I do think he changed. And it wasn't until he experienced the 1970 march in New York City, a year after Stonewall, when he saw the feeling, or he experienced the feeling and saw the masses, and just how important it is to have these protests open to all. And that's why I think we need to bring it back to that today.
Awesome. I love this question to end on because it's sort of a call to action too. Jim asks, how can we work to get states to put gay history into school curricula? He says, I believe California, New Jersey, and Colorado. That's 3 more states than I would have thought. But how do we make this happen outside of, your standard calling your representatives, et cetera, et cetera?
Richie, you've dealt, I'm sure, with school boards and
more than me. I everybody should get in touch and learn about GLSEN, GLSEN, which is an organization that is working on that issue. And they provide the curriculum, and they're trying to get into schools. I also think we have to make it a central issue to our voting. And I would, before we finish, say that the most important activism we can do is to vote, and to vote as if our lives depend on it, because they do, and vote as if other people's lives depend on it, because it does. So I ask every candidate I ever meet about LGBTQ history being taught in school, about LGBTQ inclusive sex ed, and I make it one of my criteria for voting for a candidate, and I would recommend you do that as well. GLSEN's working on this, and Trevor Project, and there's a lot of the Human Rights Campaign for a lot of these organizations are working to get this done, and you can check out their websites.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It looks like we're toward the end of time, or I have one more question if you want.
Maybe one question, maybe, and then in the meantime, I'm going to bring back John while you ask it, so we can make one last pitch for McNally Jackson. But go ahead.
So this is my question. I always hear from my friends of color that white gays are white first, and that's exactly how they say it. And I think that's a call to make the movement more intersectional. And how does that happen? What are concrete action steps for the movement to become more inclusive?
It's a great question. I think right now is the moment where we can pivot. I think this is especially with the parades already canceled because of the pandemic, and with LA taking the lead, organizations like the Reclaim Pride Coalition already having taken the lead of making these celebrations of pride, making them acts of resistance once again, and explicitly declaring that Black trans lives matter, opening them up to all, and including and ceding leadership to Black trans organizations like the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, the Sylvia Rivera Law Center. There are organizations already doing the hard work in protecting the most marginalized members of our community, and we need to go to them and ask them not just what can we do, but how can we help, and what can we do for you?
We have to remember also, we're everywhere. We are every ethnicity, every religion, every we're people of color, we're disabled, we're immigrants, we're refugees. So our intersectionality is our strength. That is where our strength is. And I find it interesting, this, what you said. Can you read the question again? That people, white men,
white gays are white first.
Right. So I explicitly say in my book, I am not, because being gay is the most important part of me, and I lead with being gay. And what I would also add to the intersectionality strength is that we have to put our queerness front and center in our lives and not diminish it, not demean it. Think about what we go through. We're disappointment to our parents. We are at battle with our government. We're stigmatized by religions. We're bullied in our childhoods. We're erased in our classrooms. We've survived a plague, and still we rise, come out, and say, "This is me." That is the spirit of an extraordinary species of people. That's how we should treat ourselves. That's how we should talk about ourselves. I'm done for the night. That's
On that note.
That was a great way to end. I love that.
Amazing. I'm not sure. Let me see if John is there. Oh, John, can you? Oh, maybe not. Well, we'll make a pitch for them. Please support independent bookshops. Right now, more than ever, these are not just businesses, they're communities that support the arts and authors in conversations like these. So please consider purchasing from McNally Jackson. If you click the little I next to the title at the top of the Crowdcast, it should open up a description where there is a link to submit your receipt. So you can submit your receipt from either McNally Jackson, or if you're from another city, from an independent bookstore in your own town. I know a lot are back ordered or out of stock. You can still order them now, upload your receipt, and we'll send you that signed book plate, because I saw someone was asking about that says "Seized for obscene content." One way to make people read history is to make it obscene, because it was, at least in the eyes of the government. So it's a fun little book plate. But Richie, thank you so much for joining and for your conversation and sharing your story with all of us. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'll see y'all in a bit, when I'm going to be talking to Mama Servini herself about her legacy of activism as well. So thank you so much, Richie, to McNally Jackson, and everyone for joining.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all.